Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, March 7th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we take a quick break from our position preview series and talk about salary cap drafts, or auctions as they were formerly known. We just had AL and NL LABR over the weekend that we were participating in. There was a mixed event as well that was on Saturday, so we figured it'd be a good time to take a look back at different ways you could execute strategies in this format. And even if you don't play in a salary cap draft or an auction, I think this will still be insightful because we'll analyze some players along the way. We'll talk about roster construction in a way that hopefully is helpful in a variety of different formats. Before we get rolling, how are things going for you on this Monday?
It's good. I saw the Batman this weekend.
The Batman.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. Very beautiful. Very long. Very long.
I was just thinking that, if we get the worst of the outcomes with a longer lockout, we're going to have to come up with something else to talk about. We can't just keep it afloat with multiple episodes per week talking about a season that will begin later indefinitely, right? At some point, we have to get into movie reviews or pickleball tips or food or all of the above. Obviously, beer could be a crutch
sandwich
for us.
episode, a beer episode, a pickleball episode.
Yeah. So if there is anything in particular that's not baseball that you think we should talk about, or you'd at least enjoy hearing us talk about, maybe send us a tweet or an email and say, hey, this would actually be a fun episode, non-baseball related, because honestly, I would like to have a few ideas stockpiled given the current state of things. But fortunately, we still have some position previews to get to. We'll pick up on that series again later this week, and plenty of time to get everything done. And even though it wasn't in person, which is always the best part of any draft, regardless of format, just seeing friends, we didn't get to do that again this year. It is fun to go through the process of playing against people you're familiar with and trying some new things, which I did. I think we both did, though. I think there's, from an auction strategy perspective, I think there's really two broad approaches that people have. There's stars and scrubs, and then there's a balanced approach. But even within each of those umbrellas, there's a lot of different things you could do that would actually shape what your final roster looks like. I almost feel like those are just the beginning of several other strategies. So I'm just curious, when you're in a format like this where you can try and execute anything you want left to your own devices, what is your optimal build when the entire player pool gets opened up to you the way that it does in an auction situation?
Yeah, I changed a little bit this year. Normally, what I do is try to get the most affordable first round pick type talent. Take the guy that actually looks like the values of my sheet. Take the $30 guy, take the $31 guy that actually looks right by my sheet, instead of paying all the way to 40 for a star, because my sheet very rarely has a $40 player in it. And so what I normally end up doing is like trying to load up on second, third, and back end first round types rather than buy at the front of the first round, if that makes sense. Instead of buying a top 3 player, I'm trying to get, the 10th best player and the 12th best player and the 13th. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to make that trade off. And then I usually try to leave like $2 for each budget spot in the back end, instead of $1, because I don't like $1 players normally. But something has changed a little bit. There's more and more $1 players that I find acceptable, not catchers. $1 catchers are the worst deal in auction strategy, unless you're in a mixed league. In a mixed league, maybe $1 catchers are fine, but in a mono league, a $1 catcher is probably not going to play. And so this year I have more $1 players than I ever had, and I paid more for a player than I've ever played before. I paid $38 for Kyle Tucker, and I have 3 $1 players in Josh Naylor, Luis Heel, and Justin Dunn. And I'm just trying to change things up, man. I've been in this league too long, haven't won it yet, and I'm tired of watching the best players go by. Just because I didn't want to put the extra dollar on them, and they didn't look right in my sheet.
Yeah, it's one of the most difficult things about being in a salary cap draft is understanding when you should push extra dollars in and when you should be strict to your values. And I'm not sure there's an easy way to learn that without going through the process a few times. And that's often going to lead you to some builds that you're not perfectly happy with, even if you do well, right? You're going to find mistakes. Like I tried a more balanced build. I didn't have as many predetermined targets going into NL LABR this weekend as I normally do. Ordinarily, I'll have 3 or 4 players or types of players, usually higher priced guys. And I say, I'm going to get a combination of these players. And I go out and do it within the first 30 minutes. And then I'm sitting there for 2 hours waiting for most of the mid-tier players to go. And then I start to get back in, once the $8, $9, $10 players start coming up a little bit later on. And I've had success playing that way, and I know you can win that way, but I think the people I see who win more consistently, especially in these deeper leagues, or the teams that at least are finishing near the top when they don't win, they are building more balanced teams. And I felt like looking at the player pool this year, so much of our focus has been on closers and getting saves. And obviously, we've kind of emerged from draft and hold season. Now we're moving into the part of the year where we're getting into drafts with our in-season moves. So I'm curious to see how people play it differently with the benefit of getting weekly waiver runs and having chances to make trades in a lot of leagues. If that's going to ease some of the pressure and lower the prices on closers. What I noticed though, when I looked at the NL pool, and I really kind of had this stand out to me when you were doing the AL auction on Friday night. In the AL, the top end closers are there's a cluster of them. You have Ryan Presley and Raisel Iglesias, and you have this group of like 3 to 4 other guys that are all pretty close in value. In the NL, it's Josh Hader, and then a big drop before you get to Edwin Diaz and Giovanni Gallegos, and some guys that are good from a skills perspective, but I think are a lot more volatile than you'd like them to be for guys that people are going to spend 17, 18, $19 on potentially. So the only predetermined target I had for this year was Josh Hader. And even at a certain point, if he got up above the number he went for, I was probably out. I was at 25. If someone said 26, I was probably walking away and doing something different. But all of this is to say that I think it's almost a strategy that you have to choose the stars and scrubs versus balanced. It's a strategy to choose based on what's happening early. And what happened early in the case of the NL was that people were overspending on players that I thought should be going for 25 to 30. A lot of those players were going for 30 to 35. So because that happened, that pushed me on to the more balanced track. Whereas if I had bought a player or two in the $25 to $30 range, I might have had a build that was more like what I've done in the past, right? So I do think you have to have a lot more flexibility in this format than you do in a typical snake draft, even though you've got a almost full group of players that you can choose from at any given time.
Yeah, the difficult thing is, and I'm not sure that any auction calculator approach will actually capture what happens in the room. I think every calculator I've used, and I've used different ones, the number that it spits out for two things will not line up with what happens in your draft. The two things are top 5 bats and closers. I have never seen an auction calculator nail what those players go for in the auction. So that's where you're going to make your biggest decision, I think, in an auction, right? It's going to be, what do I do about closers and what do I do about the top 5 players? Do I say, no thanks, all the top 5 players are going for $5 over the values? I'm out on that. I want to keep my $5 for later because I can find a lot of value out of it later. And so I'll just get a second round pick. I'll just get a couple $20 guys. Like you got Trent Grisham and who was your other $20 outfielder? Christian
Yelich and then Jesse Winker also.
Yeah. So I'm going to spread the love instead of going for the top ones. That's defensible. But I do think it leads to sometimes having too much money at the end, which is specifically what happened for you. But I just mean in different levels. Like I've bought like $10 Kevin Kiermaiers in the past because I had too much money near the end, and I waited too long. And maybe that's only $2 or $3 over, what I should have done, but that meant I had too much money. I quote unquote left money on the table. So what I tried to do differently this time was go get the guy I wanted. So I got Kyle Tucker for 38. The thing that made me hurt was Mike Trout went for 30. So I could have gotten Mike Trout for 31 and had $7 more to move around my team. However, I think Tucker is going to steal more bases, and that's another thing that I'm not sure the auction calculator is valuing the same way as the market, because stolen bases, yes, the auction calculator looks at the scarcity within the player pool and says, okay, this is worth this, and I think the auction calculator understands statistical scarcity in the categories. But then there's also just what the market does, which is pay more for stolen bases than the auction calculator says, So you have to make your decision there. And so when I saw the difference between Tucker and Trout, and I just said, I think Tucker's going to steal more bases. He's a young guy. Like, he barrels the ball. He makes contact. He has really good plate discipline. Everything's lined up. He could have a monster season. The floor is really high. There's going to be more steals than Trout. I just went and got him. I paid $38. It's more than was on my sheet. It's a mistake, quote unquote. But this time, instead of being super disciplined and just staying on my values, and I think I would have ended up with I wouldn't have even ended up with Luis Robert, because he went over my number. I think if I had been really disciplined with my numbers, my number one player might have been like George Springer for 26.
Yeah, I've never built a team this way before in a league like this. So the results of a balanced team look so different, because you're used to playing in mixed leagues where you have early round picks and you've got guys that would carry a $30+ valuation, multiple players like that. And you've got multiple high $20 guys in some of those builds, depending on where you're drafting. And when you look down and you say, oh, I don't have anybody,
because the $1 mixed league player is pretty good, is like way more decent.
Yeah, a $1 mixed league player might go for $8 to $10 in an NL or AL only
like
league.
Kyle Lewis, maybe like close to a $1 pick in mixed. He was 6 in ours. Willie Calhoun was 7.
I think that's a good sort of jump. So yes, these values don't translate particularly well to the broader player pool, but again, I think we can make this sort of helpful in just the sense of how we're thinking about solving the roster construction problem. If you're watching us on YouTube, we do have the screen up of the auction results. We'll look at the AL side from Eno's draft first. And if you have any questions, of course, as always, ask in the comments, fire us an email. We're happy to try and help with this, because I know this is a format that more and more people are trying to play, and the learning curve is fairly steep, but it's a lot of fun to actually have this opportunity to play this way too. You said you started off with Kyle Tucker, at least from a cost standpoint, at 38. I mean, I think what you ran into is a common problem. If you see the room is either at or above projected values consistently for the first 20 or 30 minutes, when you're talking mostly about the very best players in the pool, you have to decide right away, okay, there's going to be some value late. Some of the players that I thought were going to go for $3 to $4, they're now $1 to $2 players. So you make that small adjustment. And you also have to decide, am I going to pay the extra couple of dollars for at least one player? I think if you're playing in a mixed league, aggressive spending is going to be even more common than it is in a league like this, than in a mono league. And I think you're going to be less likely to get punished for aggressive spending. I think if you follow the room and you end up with one player at the top that's $2 or $3 above your number, or maybe even a little bit more, I don't think it's going to hurt you that badly, because you don't want to have a situation where there's no one to spend money on later.
Yeah.
And that can happen in leagues this deep. It doesn't happen in mixed leagues. There's always going to be a good enough player in a mixed league to fill out the bottom of your roster. So if you had 7 or 8 $1 players in a mixed league, you're going to be fine. If you have 7 or 8 $1 players in an AL or NL only league, there's a very good chance you're going to come up light on playing time, and you're going to have a lot of problems all season as a result.
Yeah. $1 bats are still like, I'm happy with mine, Josh Naylor, but I wouldn't want more, because the other $1 bats are Oscar Mercado, Jock Peterson, who isn't even signed yet. Who are some other $1? It's not good. Edward Olivares, who's being optioned as we speak. Daz Cameron is a $1 player. Like $1 bats are not a good deal, and I can see that a lot of people here avoided the $1 bat entirely. Like there's that. I think I just gave you the whole list. Oh, Ramon Urias, who I wanted for 2, but I didn't have the money anymore. So, yeah, very few $1 bats are even worth rostering. So. I think there's more $1 arms. And so that was my thinking process was, I'm going to find a $1 outfielder that I think will play. That's my Josh Naylor. There are more values in the back end of the outfield pool. So I'm going to take one ace outfielder in Kyle Tucker, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my money on mid-round infielders, and then come back and finish the outfield with Kepler, Brandon Marsh, Kyle Lewis, Chad Pinder, Josh Naylor. And I want to highlight the outfield strategy because I think there's a few things going on there. Outfielders, we were talking off air about how, let's say you're a corner infielder in a deep league, in a deep league situation. You're a corner infielder, but you might not be able to play third base that well. If you're a corner outfielder, I think you can play left and right, especially in a pinch. And it seems less differentiated than the infield stuff. So I just believe that fourth outfielders in baseball play more often. And if that's true, that means there's a whole extra crew of players that's more valuable in the outfield situation than the infield. So I wanted to make also the argument for Brandon Marsh, who barreled the ball really well in a short amount of time and stole bases. The strikeout rate is a question mark, but he's had better strikeout rates in the past. I think Brandon Marsh has a better floor than Joe Adele and may get the first shot at most of the regular playing time. So I'm really big on Brandon Marsh, actually. Kyle Lewis barreled the ball really well, and the only question is health. And then Chad Pinder barreled the ball really well and is on the A's, who are more likely to let players go than to add more players, I think. So I feel like Chad Pinder is a great late round American League only situation. And then Josh Naylor is just a bet that maybe he can take the first base job from Bobby Bradley, who can't make contact. So that was the thinking there. And most of you'll see almost everywhere that barrels are my bias. Hunter Dozier I got for corner infield. Nathan Lowe I got for first base. These are all guys who barrel the ball really well.
Yeah, pretty consistently a part of the offense that you built. You get the German influence in there with Max Kepler, too, who's just a weird player. The more you look at him, I mean, he doesn't strike out much, but he's a batting average liability, has some power, has some speed, doesn't seem like he's going to lose his job. So I think he'll end up being a pretty undervalued player in deeper leagues like this. And at 15, maybe you end up getting $18 or $20 worth of value. Maybe you just break even, but you need some guys like that. I think he's very stable for a format like this.
He really fit my general strategy. If you've been listening, my general strategy is to get my stolen bases a little at a time. And there was some feedback on Twitter that I wouldn't have enough stolen bases, and I hear it because my major stolen base threat is Tucker. And maybe Marsh if he gets the full role, and then Ahmed Rosario. So you're like, oh, dude, you're light on steals. However, Nate Lowe stole 8 bases. He can steal 5 to 10. Nick Solak stole 5 bases. He can steal 5 to 10. Juan Moncada is not going to be a 0 there. Jose Altuve is not going to be a 0 there. Hunter Dozier is not a 0. So I basically did the not a 0 strategy. And Kepler fit because I think he actually will steal 10 plus. And that's what I needed. So when I add it up, I get sort of around 80 to 85 steals, and I have a gentleman's agreement over some adult sodas about whether or not I hit 80 steals. But it is kind of hard when you look at it. You're like, you have no steals, guys. But I think I got a handful at a time, and 80 is enough to stay in the middle of the pack in stolen bases in a mono league. And maybe I can trade for or find some steals on the waiver wire as the season progresses. Also have Stephen Kwan in reserves as sort of a handcuff to Josh Naylor, and he might steal some bases. So just trying to get just enough. The one big thing that you also have to do if you're in a mono league like this is just choose your warts, like where are your warts going to be. You're not going to build a perfect team. So you're going to have to choose some places where you're going to be like, maybe it works out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good squad that you put together. I think the fact that you just don't have weakness in that group of hitters, I think Josh Naylor is worth more than $1 in a format like this. That's probably just auction dynamics. People didn't have anything left to spend by the time that Naylor came around.
Mm-hmm.
That's really encouraging. I think with pitching, for you to not spend up at the very top of the pool makes a lot of sense. There was a surprising buy that Ian Kahn got Ravi Ray for $21. I think that was one of the few times all night where someone got a bargain, especially with a player over $20. It felt like pricing in this room was very tight, like right up to the projection, if not a tick above, almost on every single
I
player.
felt like I had to basically go $1 over my projection to get any player.
Yeah, because I was doing the commentary with Jeff Erickson and Eric Carabell for the First Pitch Florida group, and I think we said good value a total of 3 times in like 4 hours of watching this thing, which is it's a very, very tight room. So I think you see a few bargains like that, but this is what a really competitive auction room will look
Like I
like. And
think I had Kyle Lewis for 11 and bought him for 6, and that's like the biggest like projection like auction calculator value on my team.
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the pitching side. Barrios at 22, that seems like full price. Cease at 18, Romano at 17, Shane
I had
McClanahan at
McClanahan
15.
higher. I had McClanahan higher than 15. So that was a value for me too. McClanahan at 15. And then you just to finish off the strategy here and talk about how you were talking about like what you do. I think what you do with saves is important. I like to get like $17 to $19 closer. I don't really want to spend $26 for the best one in the pool. So I was hoping to get Aroldis Chapman or Jordan Romano. Aroldis Chapman went to 19. I didn't put the dollar to go to 20. So I ended up with Jordan Romano. I wanted Aroldis Chapman, Jordan Romano, or Ryan Presley. Presley went for 20, so I wasn't going to 21. I really thought about going to 20 to get Chapman, and instead I went to 17 to get Romano. That's where I try to spend is in the like 3rd to 5th best closer in the pool.
Yeah, Emmanuel Clase also lumped in that group. He went for 20 in this room. It was just one of those things where I couldn't believe compared to the NL just how much of a drop off there was. Part of that is Kenley Jansen still being a free agent and what they decided for this league. I mean, I know we've had at least one person email us and say we can't move our draft back. We've got life stuff going on. We have to move forward now. What do you do with all these free agents? LABR decided to take the top 12 based on ADP and remove them from the auction pool. And we're going to have a separate waiver run with free agent bidding for those players before the season begins. So, uh, probably 5 to 7 players will end up in this pool, and then the rest will end up in the other. And that will open up some surprising players, sort of like the trade deadline does. And I'm really curious to see how that gets handled just from a bidding standpoint. Like, how aggressive do you want to be this early? Probably more aggressive than you'd be at the trade deadline, but then you have to be able to play light on fab the rest of the year. If Trevor Story signs in your league and you say, well, Trevor Story is going to do everything for me, I'm going to throw a big chunk of fab at him. How well do you cope with everything else you did? I think if you were trying to get one of the high end free agents that ends up in the pool, you'd want to have a more balanced build right now because you're less likely to have massive holes to fill with the rest of your fab. Like, I think the spread the risk and then pony up the fab is the right way to go compared to stars and scrubs and then ponying up fab, because then you're going to have 5 to 7 roster spots where you're not getting enough playing time. And if you have any injury trouble at all with that core of stars, you will miss. You will have not nearly enough playing time, and you just won't find replacements on the wire, especially when you have limitations in what you can bid.
Yeah, I think Carlos Rodon will be a tough one for me.
Mm.
I think he'll end up in the American League, and although I like Barrios, Cease, and McClanahan, Patino at 9 is my next pitcher, and it'd be really good to have maybe more innings there. So I'm a little bit weak on my 4th starting pitcher. I had to, like I said, I had You have warts, fourth starting pitcher. I'm sure there's other people who have that wart. So, and Patino, I think, the sky's the limit. It's just a question of innings. So, one thing I tried to do was use my reserves on starting pitchers, which I think is a good move. But I will have a big decision about whether or not I use a bunch of FAB to get Carlos Rodon on this team.
Yeah, that's a decision that, I mean, maybe we get more injury information between now and the time that actually occurs, and that guides how aggressive some of us are going to be with that. But I'm going to pull up the NL board just for a few minutes and kind of walk through a few things that hit me. You were talking earlier about not wanting to fill too much in the outfield. That's sort of what happened to me here. As you can see, Yelich, Winker, Grisham at 21, 20, and 20. Three players I like. They all make sense at the price. Yelich and Grisham can do a little bit of everything. I think Winker sneakily could be an NL MVP candidate this year because I think he can hit for average, and the power uptick looks real to me. Playing time should be there. Run production should be there. If you said we're going to fast forward a year, how much is Jesse Winker going for in the same room? And you said $30. I would not be surprised by that. That was part of the appeal. He was definitely someone I thought about having in advance and ended up getting him when it all came together. But where it started to bite me later, I couldn't pass up on the value of Michael Conforto, who was one of the eligible free agents. I think Conforto, coming off a down year, was discounted by a couple extra dollars on top of the free agent situation. Because if we knew Conforto were playing in the NL right now, he's easily a $15 player, probably more of an $18 player. So to get him for less than half of that is great. The problem was, at that point in the auction, for me to spend $7 on anyone, I really needed someone who was going to run. So I ended up a little bit light in speed because I tacked a current free agent on who doesn't run into an outfield that already had Jesse Winker. And I think when you start looking at where stolen bases come from, so many of them come from the middle infield and the outfield, that you really don't want to have more than one outfielder who doesn't run. You have to really think about that as part of your roster construction, no matter what you're doing. Like, I like Corey Seager a lot in mixed leagues. If you have Corey Seager as an early middle round guy, that's going to cost you something later. You're going to have to find a way to make up some steals somewhere else. So you just have to be really careful with the build. And that was one of the areas where being kind of agnostic about how the pieces fit came back to bite me later. Playing purely for value and not thinking enough about the very specific shape of the player pool, that was probably a mistake for me, even though in a vacuum, Conforto's a good value.
Yeah, but and it also just, I found the same thing where I saw a bunch of outfielders go for like $1 less, which was like kind of a big deal in that one. I was like, oh man, or $2 less. Like these are some good values, but I think that the outfield just produces those. And I think you really want to keep 2 or 3 slots open for outfielders. Like, for example, in TGFBI, which is snake, so it's a little bit different, but I just kept the outfield slots open at the end, and ended up with the last 3 outfielders, Grossman, Nimmo, and McNeil, as my last 3 outfielders. And I took them all way behind ADP, and way late in the draft. They're like my 3 last bats that I bought, and I feel pretty good about that. So I just think that the outfield produces a lot of value, and you just want to kind of keep that open as long as possible and just try to get the very best. But although I don't, I have nothing against the top 3 that you got. I like that. So
yeah, it's just one of those problems that I knew it was a possible issue, and then I ran into a little extra trouble with the Conforto edition specifically. And I think as you look at the infield that came together, I mean, I feel like I did fine with the catchers. Carson Kelly at 10, Travis d'Arnaud at 8. If you're in a 2-catcher league, you're just looking for a lot of playing time for guys that won't hurt you badly. And I think that describes Kelly and d'Arnaud. They'd be among my 2-catcher mixed league targets as well. Ideally,
Carson Kelly is my TGFBI catcher.
Yeah, but because I think Dalton Varsho gets most of his playing time in the outfield, and Kelly can have a 3/4 playing time share, and he's not a bad hitter. So, and he might actually hit a little high in the order too, because of the way that team is built right now. So those guys are fine. The optimal catcher strategy for me, and we'll talk about it more in our catcher preview, I'd like to get one high volume elite guy, especially in a salary cap situation where I can go get whatever I want. It's different in a snake because that opportunity cost is a lot different, having to choose JT Realmuto or Will Smith compared to the other players going in that range. I feel like you're giving up a little bit more in those leagues. But you do have to have your kind of ideal catcher strategy and then your fallback catcher strategy to avoid $1 Austin Barnes or $1 Thomas Nido, because those guys just don't play enough. Unfortunately, I think that's the
Yeah, I think there
lesson that I've
was even
learned
a
the hard way.
study that like the $1 catcher is like the worst deal in the mono leagues.
Really bad. Really, I've lived it. I've gone through it enough times. I believe it to be true. I think the other question that you have to start thinking about too, though, is if you're playing with a cheap infield, as I did, Wilmer Flores at 12, Nick Ahmed at 5, Evan Longoria at 12, Gavin Lux at 13, JD Davis at 7, Nolan Gorman at 7. There's a lot of ways playing time wise that could be a mess, but I think those players, I think Longoria is a 450 to 500 plate appearance guy that on a per plate appearance basis is actually pretty good. He's just a good accumulator at this point. The offense is better than we thought it was going to be a couple of years ago. So I'm comfortable with him. I think Flores is sort of just right. And then I have a lot now riding on Gavin Lux getting more than 400 plate appearances. There's definitely a scenario where he's just an extra guy and he starts 3-ish times per week when everyone's healthy. There's also a scenario where he takes a spot, claims it as his own. It goes well over 500 plate appearances. And I sort of need that to keep pace because I have so many semi-regulars sprinkled around this infield.
Yeah, it's a dicey one. I'd like though that the Gorman is there. He may not start the season with the Cardinals, but I do think that he's a very good player and that he will finish the season with the Cardinals. And so I think with Jeff McNeil there and Wilmer Flores there, you have some guys that could add second base eligibility and play in there. Also, with Wilmer Flores on the roster, you could just push Flores over to second and see what you can get at first base in the FAB portion. And then you actually might be a candidate, I think, for spending hard on a free agent once he signs. I think, even going to like $80 for Freddie Freeman, it might feel like a Hail Mary, but it might just be what this team needs.
Yeah, I think I will have to be aggressive with anyone at that caliber who ends up in the NL pool. And I think the way I'm built right now, those infielders, a few of those guys can move around. McNeil already does have second base and outfield, so it's
Oh,
nice to
he's
be able to.
already has that.
He has it, yeah. So he
Oh,
can
that's
move a
good.
little bit.
Yeah. So now you're
And
just looking for any bat.
yeah, because Lux is second and short. Flores is first, second, and third. There's a few ways to make that work, and basically I can put Gorman on the bench because I assume he's at AAA to start the season, and sort of plug in almost any infielder. Freddie Freeman would be ideal. Story might be better if I don't get steals via trade. I need a little more speed.
Yeah, a little bit.
If I can't
find
it,
I counted up. I think I'm around 65, 70 for you.
yes, that's about where I'm at too. And I think you want to at least be in the 80s because you can get lucky and get more, and you can obviously trade for more. You can find some on the wire. But I do think if I didn't trade for more or get Story or something else, that would be the category where I'm easily the weakest. And I think it's important to address that as quickly as possible. I know Ian Kahn and Jason Collette had a deal done by Sunday morning or like midday Sunday already after finishing this draft on Friday. It's on brand for Ian for sure, but they both quickly realized how they had kind of opposite problems on their roster, and it's easier to balance that out before injuries and demotions and other chaos happen. Because I think the longer I've played in these really deep leagues, the more I've realized it's very difficult to line up for a big trade and get both teams what they need in the return. It's so hard to find compatible rosters. So right out of the draft, I think it's easier to see everybody's flaws, and it's easier to agree on values since you just went through the
there's a
exercise.
number on it right there.
The room just priced everybody for you. So the sooner you could make a move to fix that flaw is probably the easiest it can possibly be.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about, and I wonder if I think this did happen to you. I got a text from you in the middle of the draft about a single player, which is that sort of, there's the idea of I'm only going to spend what My value sheet says I'm not going to spend this much more. I might go $1 over. I think that too many people have a sense of false precision about exactly what the auction calculator is spitting out in terms of their numbers. And so I think it's okay sometimes to go a couple bucks over. And my example is I have Gleyber Torres ahead of Ahmed Rosario, just generally for any league. They're both, I think, mixed league and mono league important, both usable. They both, I think, will steal 12 to 15 bags this year. I think they'll both hit, 10 plus homers. But the reason I'm betting on Gleyber Torres is he has a much better sense of the strike zone. So again, we're coming back to the same stats you always hear me talk about, but he has a much better sense of the strike zone. Reach rate is lower, and his barrel rate was higher. So I think he's a better hitter than Ahmed Rosario. Gleyber Torres went to 20, and I didn't want to go to 21 because my value sheet said 19.50 or something. It said 19 or $20. And I said, I'm not going to go over. Right. And I said, well, worst case scenario, I have Ahmed Rosario later, who's here for 18. Well, I got Ahmed Rosario for 20 because he got bid up to 19, and my putting that extra dollar on, was just $1. And I wasn't like, there's this thing that happens with bidding where you're just like, when you get that dollar in is a big deal. Like, oh, if I had put 20 on Torres, I would have won him, but I
Most
didn't want to go
likely,
to,
yeah.
I didn't want to go to 21. But instead, I got the inferior player for the 20. I think I'd rather have Torres for 21, So there's just like this weird, this $1 decision that can go either way. And sometimes I think you just need to go get your player. I think I would rather just had Torres for 21. And the other time that it came up for me, and this is where it gets in the weeds a little bit for mono leagues, but I think it's still instructive. So I wanted Luis Torrens for $4, right? My second catcher. And I think he can steal that job. I think there's a lot of sort of stuff in his statistical profile that has worked in different years. Like he's had good contact rates in some years, and he's had good barrel rates in some years, and he hasn't put it all together yet. So I'm thinking that there's a chance he puts it all together, and that's why I wanted him. But if I had put him out there at $1, somebody would have gone to 2, then I would have gone to 3, and then somebody would have stolen him from me for 4. If they wanted to. And then I wouldn't have gone to 5 because I didn't want to. So I put Torrens out for 2. Somebody went to 3. I went to 4. Boom, I bought him. So there are these weird sort of dollar jumps and these moments where, am I gonna save $2 so I can get all my $1 players for $2? And is that a good idea? Why do I want to get all my $1 players for $2? I should get my $1 players for $1. So there's that +1, our auction values come out at plus 30 cents and plus 50 cents, like our auction calculators have an extra decimal that our auctions don't.
Right. And I know you can be rigid and never go over. I know that's kind of the way Larry Schechter plays, and that's brought him a lot of success. But I don't think that's necessarily the best way for everybody else to play, because I think doing that also requires knowing exactly what's going to happen later with the money, the little bits that you're saving, making sure you use that correctly. And I think as someone who's less familiar with playing that way, that's the problem I ran into. The Rosario Torres thing, it happened to me like in a loop where I kept waiting. I kept saying, okay, this guy's $2 over my
Am I going to go to 3?
I'm going to go down to 3. I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to be fine. I'm just going to say, I'll get the next guy, and I'll get the next guy. And that happened 4 or 5 times. And suddenly
there was no next guy.
I had 3 roster spots left, and I think I had $29 to spend. And there weren't a lot of $10 players left. So I'm like, crap, now I'm in trouble. I did not spend this money. I knew there was a point. Gene Segura is the one that really got away from me when it happened. I think Doug Dennis got him for 15. I knew I should have went 16.
And what was your value sheet?
I think I even had him at 16 or 17. But I think I got caught either. I don't know if I was looking at the pool real quick just to see what else there was. I just got really kind of caught up in the minutia of not overpaying. I was just double checking to make sure I didn't go too high. And that was a time where I was like, it did not matter. And the trickle down,
gotten the guy.
It's easy to see how it would change if on that roster, like if you take a look at my infield and you say, boy, this team would look a lot better if, Gene Segura were on this roster instead of Nick Ahmed, right? And for $16 or $17 or even $18, that's what it took to get Segura, I had that money. That money ended up going on Anthony Bender in the end, where, yeah, sure, Anthony Bender might be a $5 to $7 pitcher in a format like this, probably a dollar guy in a mixed league who get you some saves. But I threw all of my money on him because we have Fab redemption. So leaving money on the table here is even worse than just overpaying for Anthony Bender. So when you look at the results and you go, wow,
Which
Anthony
means if
Bender's
Bender gets
DVRs,
hurt, you get money back.
right, I can get Fab back, which in
Yeah.
this year might be really important because I'm going to probably have to spend Fab to get some infield help already. So
In the past, people who've had money left on the table have actually bought people they know are injured.
mhm.
You know,
At
just
least
to
this way, I got a
convert
player
that.
that will help me, but I clearly had $10 more to spend somewhere, whether that was a couple of upgrades, pushing an extra couple dollars in on Dylan
Under
Carlson.
Infield,
Yeah,
Segura.
infield especially. I thought I had to spend more
Segura
on.
would steal more than Ahmed. Yeah, Segura would have been.
It would have been good. I'd have
Yeah.
more balance, more playing time probably. I think Ahmed could lose his job in Arizona. He could get traded. He could have in a part-time role. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. So I guess the thing that makes me feel okay about the whole situation is that I knew what the problem was when it was happening, and I just couldn't quite bring myself. I couldn't overpay for Pavin Smith, which I should have done because I could have overpaid for Pavin Smith and still got Anthony Bender later. Like that's the lesson here. So part of the problem with playing a way you don't normally play is that you can be in a slightly unfamiliar position and not know exactly when to push the extra chips in, when to say, screw it, I'm going to spend the extra couple of dollars. It doesn't matter at this point because there's no one else to spend it on. I didn't recognize that moment the ways I should have, and it's going to cost me just a little bit. I got
I
a
think
couple. Go ahead.
one thing that I think ports over to snake drafts and is interesting for mono or any kind of auction list is I think you should have two tabs with your player values if you have an Excel sheet or something. You should have two tabs. One tab should be sorted from the top, just values from the top. So regardless of position, 37, 36, 35, sorted by auction value. And that way you can see, how many $20 players are left, just in a general sort of quality level. How much $20 players are left? How many $15 players are left? That sort of deal, right? So that the scarcity of quality of players. In the second tab, you should have it, I think, sorted for position and then auction value. Because then you can go to your second tab and say, like I did at one point, and say, holy crap, Hunter Dozier and Carlos Santana are the last corner infielders I want on my team. That's all that's left. I don't really want the rest of them. And so I went to Dozier. I went to 9. I think he was 9 in my values. I just wanted to get Dozier, especially because he steals a couple bases and Carlos Santana doesn't. So I did that to avoid Miguel Cabrera at $4, Bobby Bradley at $6, G-Man Choi at $2, Nick Pratto at $1. So I feel like I stayed off the bottom by doing that. So I just wanted to offer that as like a potential sort of Excel strategy where you'd have these two tabs and you kind of alternate between looking at overall value and looking at with position value, because the with position value is going to be more and more important over the course of your draft as you be like, oh, I have to fill these places,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one area that I've changed preparation the last couple of years is I started highlighting players. I use the RotoWire draft software to track the entire room as it's happening. And I've got these highlighted tiers. And I think I highlighted too many players. I think the visual cues I gave myself were actually a little bit misleading, where the
You're like,
shades of
wait, I
colors I
don't actually
chose.
want those two down at the bottom of that highlighted tier.
Yes, like it was like I made the sheet too pretty. I made the screen too pretty.
So you're like, oh, there's still players left.
Exactly right. I didn't do a good enough job making it clear, like, there's a cliff there. This is where you have to spend. Like that was a small preparation error that, I think is going to cost me quite a bit. The pitching side in the NL was interesting, though, because in past years, I've been a lot more aggressive with starting pitching. I definitely backed off the high end starters. I felt like they were at least going to the numbers they should have been going to. So it wasn't like people were getting great values with most of that group. There might be a handful kind of sprinkled in. My most expensive starter was Charlie Morton. And I think you and I have talked enough about Charlie Morton where I know that that can work just fine. I'm not having any doubts about that. But what I think is interesting about the NL pitching pool, and this certainly applies if you're playing in a mixed league this year, I wonder if the NL pitchers are being overpriced in general, even though all relative to each other. If ratios all go up in the NL-only pool, it's not as big of a deal as if they jump up in the mixed pool and sort of catch where their AL counterparts are. But I wonder if that's something people have not necessarily thought enough about in planning for this season, is making sure they're correcting for what are likely going to be higher ERAs and WHIPs for the entire pool of NL pitchers.
I did check with Derek Carty on the subject, and he said that the BAT projections currently assume there will be an NLDH. So I know that for one projection system at least. We'll see. I do wonder how that works in a mono league. Maybe just everyone's worse, so everyone's the same. But it is something that won't actually affect the player pool uniformly. Like there are players that are good enough that it won't matter. They have to strike one more batter out. They'll just strike them out. Like, do you think Corbin Burns will really care that much about, one more hitter?
He will not.
But there are, people like maybe Alex Wood on your team, not to pick. I'm just, maybe Alex Wood or maybe Josiah Gray. We'll have a lot more trouble with another hitter, with another real hitter at the back end of the lineup. So
maybe it's a terrible Galaxy brain idea, but I was wondering if the 5 and fly guys, the 19, 20, 21, 22 batters faced group, the guys that are out of the game a little earlier, if they get impacted the most, because they were probably only going through the lineup twice and maybe with a clean start to the last inning, trying to get through that third time or part of the third time. But if you make the lineup more difficult against them and they run into some more trouble, their value might actually take a hit.
And then if you pair that with the way the CBA might change options, where you're not able to option your relievers up and down to have as many 4 or 5 and dive guys, and you have to leave those guys in, then maybe you start getting outsized ERAs from some players that you're kind of surprised to see that from. If Chris Paddock's ERA was already a little bit higher than you expect because he only has 2 pitches, what happens if you have to leave him in 5 or 6 innings because your bullpen is taxed because you don't have the option strategy anymore? And, then he gives up another homer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe teams are a little likely to let a starter wear one on a bad day, depending on what's going on with the rest of their pitchers.
I love Rasmussen, but are they going to have to leave Rasmussen in longer because they can't option up and down in Tampa all the time? And will that be good for Rasmussen? He's mostly a 2-pitch guy. So I wonder if we see, a third and fourth pitch becoming more important as the CBA negotiates different rules.
Yeah, I think those are great questions to think about. Steven Strasburg ended up on my team at 10, and I feel like he's been very much ignored throughout this draft season. I don't know if you and I have even mentioned his name once since the end of last season. Of course, there's a big question. Is he even healthy? He was scheduled to start throwing back in November. I did just a little bit of digging, turned up nothing so far that suggests that he's been limited or not going through a normal offseason. And skills-wise, I guess the question is like a two-parter. Like, one, do you think the skills are still intact? It's hard to know since we haven't seen a lot of them. And two, do you think the risk is really any greater with Strasburg if we're thinking about him and the injury he's coming back from versus guys like Syndergaard or even Severino, who have made it back from Tommy John, but still kind of have this unknown workload ahead of them here in 2022?
Yeah, it is bizarre. I know that from Jeff Zimmerman's research that fastball velocity in a return from the IL is remarkably sticky. It becomes meaningful really fast. So like 2 or 3 starts and you know the rest of season fastball velocity. But does that port over to the next season? Because that's the thing with Strasburg is like what we saw from Strasburg last year was clearly a lesser pitcher. And so I can show you that the stuff numbers are bad, but I can also show you on my rankings that he's higher than he would be just based on his stuff numbers, because there's this outside chance that he comes back healthy and all of a sudden you're seeing 94s on the gun again. I mean, he's had that in him and it's all about health. So Strasburg and Thor were very hard for me to rank because we did have actual numbers from their stuff. They weren't good, but they were in limited sample and also could have been affected by injury. Like, for example, Thor didn't throw a single breaking ball. Of course, his stuff number is low. So Yeah, I think it's really tough, but I have seen some analysis that says that players returning from injury or players with the very heightened injury risk actually are good values a lot of times. And Strasburg going for 10 is like, I think that's really interesting that, he goes for 10 and Tyler Maygill goes for 11. Well, Tyler Maygill could be good or could be bad. But there's that question and the health question. With Strasburg, it's like, if the health question is that he's good, then he's probably good.
Yeah.
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, he's barely pitched in 2 years, but it's I don't know. Maybe this is the point in Strasburg's career similar to what we saw with Justin Verlander with the core muscle repair surgery he had later in his time in Detroit. I mean, there's a point people thought Justin Verlander was done because he missed a lot of time with injuries, pitched more than Strasburg around that. But I think I know it's more likely that a pitcher that starts the break is just done than he's going to come back and be good. But he was so good before he broke. I'm willing to take that chance pretty much anywhere. And I felt like we have collectively all just forgotten how good Steven Strasburg is. They need him. They're clearly a team that will give him the ball every fifth day so long as he's healthy. And if they have any chance of surprising teams this season, he's part of how they would get there because he could be a 5 WAR pitcher again. I mean, it's not unthinkable. At least I don't think it's unthinkable that Steven Strasburg could still be pretty useful. So just a surprising player in a few ways because I don't think I've drafted him at all. And then the more I've looked at him, like, why? Why not? Like, there's no reason not to at the price. In mixed leagues, he's almost free. If you're wrong, you can drop him. In a league like this, maybe there's more risk because you need quality innings, but there was some cheap pitching available. I was surprised German Marquez was only $4. In this league specifically, you can't take him out unless he's hurt or he gets sent down or he's released. He's obviously not going to get sent down. He's not going to get released. So it's just an injury that I'm possibly worried about. But I think a Coors pitcher like Marquez, who I know is going to get me a lot of Ks, even if the ratios aren't nearly as good as they would be if he pitched anywhere else, I kind of like him in this format because I can't screw it up. He just stays in. He's just in the lineup all the time. And I can't guess wrong on sitting him at Dodger Stadium and having him deal or not knowing when to use him at Coors and when to sit him. It's almost like the NL-only league makes German Marquez sort of a best ball player by default because you can't take him out.
Yeah, for that reason, I like your Taiwan Walker $4 pick better.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think
I really like that one.
Walker should have been 8 or 9, and he came out so late that it was just a bargain.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick because it's good innings. It's a really good home park. I don't think there's a lot of times where you're just afraid. I'm not saying he won't blow up. Like he'll have some bad starts, I'm sure, but there are not times where you'd be like, oh my god, I wish I didn't have Walker in there. I know that German Marquez did better at home last year. I can't bet on something like that statistically to continue. Like it's happened for like no other pitcher, but it's going to happen for German Marquez. All right, maybe.
It's not even anything like that. I guess what I'm hoping for is I don't get rabbit ball ERA. If I get last year's ratios again with that many Ks, that is of value in this format. He's probably a $9 to $10 pitcher, so getting him at 4, I'm happy with that. I definitely like the Walker buy. Andrew Heaney at 7 is 100% just leaning into the Dodgers, saying if they like that guy, I should like that guy. That's kind of where I've been on him throughout this entire draft season, and $7 doesn't seem too bad given the injury risk that's been in play for him for the better part of the last 3 or so years.
Yeah, I do think in mono leagues it's worth getting to that 4 and above level for your final pitchers. I mean, I have Luis Gil for $1, but I'm actually hoping he gets sent down and I get to play with that roster spot either as a reliever or out there. Justin Dunn at $1 is just an insane amount of risk. I mean, I know my model likes his breaking ball, but both his breaking balls, but the projection numbers are not good. The results on the field have not been good. So I may just end up cutting that one because I'm just too scared of even the first week. But yeah, $1 pitchers you'll end up with Justin Dunn. I think, getting in that $4 range, German Marquez and Taiwan Walker is just so much better. In the AL, even in the $4 range, is Domingo Germán. I'd rather have him than Justin Dunn,
Yeah, I think when you look at auction results, you could always find a player at a similar price that you ended up liking better, and some of that is just the benefit of not knowing what was going to happen next, or not
No, I
having
mean,
a
in this case, it was this is what Kyle Tucker cost me.
yeah.
Because I would have rather have spent $3 to $4 on the Justin Dunn slot and had a better pitcher, but going to 38 on Kyle Tucker literally cost me the difference between Domingo Germán and Justin Dunn.
So I mean, I'm just looking at the rosters kind of next to you, right? Randy Arozarena went for 27 to Larry Schechter. Would you rather pay 28 for Arozarena and then had 10 more to spread out on the bottom part of your pitching?
I didn't actually, because the Arozarena one happened before Tucker, and I
Yeah,
just
that was
didn't
early.
like that. I didn't like it. I thought it was way over. For a guy that's a price enforcer and strict projection value, like I don't know. Let me see if I have mine open. I don't. I think I had 23 down for Randy Arozarena.
That was happening
So
to me on a lot of players in that range in the NL, where it was several dollars above what I expected, not just a buck or two. A buck or two doesn't bother me. $3,
yeah,
$4, $5 over, and I just think in a mono, I can't bring that early
the
on,
Arozarena
especially.
thing happened, and it led to the Tucker thing. Because I was like, if everyone's going to be like $4 over, then let me just go get Kyle Tucker.
Right. And that is a
You
decision
know,
you have to make at a certain point as
but
those
Trout
top
is the
tiers run out.
one. Trout is the one, dude.
That was
Mike
among the
Trout for
bargains.
30 gives me $8. And $8 from Kyle Tucker, yes, I won't have as many steals, but maybe then I can get who was a steals guy in the outfield that I had to go short. I couldn't stay up on. Maybe I could get Hayes has some steals.
Manny Margot for 8.
Manny Margot for 8. Yeah, I could have used him. Jaron Duran for 5. I could have used an extra buck there.
Kyle Isbell for 3 is kind of interesting for a league this deep.
Yeah. And then Miles Straw for 22. I think the value sheet had him at like 21, 22. So like I could have gone to 23 there if I had an extra buck. And, would Trout and Straw be like a better combo than Tucker and Kepler? Maybe.
That's it's a funny thing because I do think the Trout injury risk is real. Like that's the problem. It's not the K rate going up. We talked about him on part 1 of the outfield preview. I think pairing him with Straw is the right way to think about making a really good 2-player combo. But Straw has just that weird skills risk where you say, oh, so much of this production is coming out of this one category. So in the event that he gets a hamstring injury or a quad injury or something that just
Then I
slows
have
him
0
down,
steals.
then you're screwed on steals, and it's so hard to replace it. Like I do think, as opposed to players that are overloaded in a category, I do like more balanced profiles. Like if I was going to pay for a top player in the NL pool, it was Trey Turner because he does everything. I'm less likely to pay for Starling Marte right now, even though he does hit for good average. He's a little light on power, heavy on steals. I don't necessarily want players that tilt that way in leagues this deep because it's very difficult to replace that lost production. Whereas in a mixed league, I don't have concerns that are quite like that. I'm a little more willing to have those players.
I still built my TGFBI the same way, Goldschmidt, Semien, Swanson, Moncada, Lowe, Torres, Betts, Yelich, Grossman, Nimmo, McNeil. Like, there's not a steals only guy in there.
Yeah. So a lot to look through as you're looking at the results. No, I don't like Anthony Bender as much as the $18 bid would lead me to believe. Yeah. If I do happen to win the league somehow, I will probably purchase an Anthony Bender jersey, even though there's no cash payout for first place in this league. But I think I would owe it to myself, at least a jersey, right? You'd have to at least get an Anthony Bender jersey, given the way this played out.
If I win, I'm getting a Hunter Dozier jersey, I think. I think there's things to like. He had an injury and it affected him at the plate. There's a piece by Alec Lewis about it that's pretty good. And so I'm hoping that without that injury, he can get back to what he barrels the ball well and steals bases. So, if he doesn't do that, then I'm looking for a CI, and I'm looking at Josh Naylor or Chad Pinder and hoping they get CI eligibility, or going big in the free agency draft, which I didn't really want to do either. So it'll be a Hunter Dozier jersey. But if I do really win, I think it'll be somewhere between Dozier, Brandon Marsh, Kyle Lewis, Chad Pinder, and Luis Patino. I think those are my sort of key young players that need to be a little bit better.
Yeah, maybe it's a card instead of if it's a good player, like a really good player, buying the card is nice because then you've got that extra investment for later. I don't know if an Anthony Bender
Especially if it's like
autographed
for that
PSA
year,
10 is
right?
going to matter. Yeah,
Like a 2022 Kyle Tucker would be a good card.
yeah, it wouldn't cost much.
Oh, and the last thing I just wanted, this is really, really in the weeds, but just a really quick thing about reserves. In LABR, they have this thing that like you can only put people on your bench if they are in the minors or you bought them for $0 at the auction. If you bought them in the reserve part of the auction. So I don't buy relievers in that part because the reliever is either going to be a closer, which yeah, okay, if you got a closer in the reserves, that's great. You're super happy. However, he's going to give you no use otherwise because you're not going to put him in your lineup. I got very little use out of my relievers last year, and I was so happy to reserve them. So I think the best use in these formats is for starting pitching because you can basically stream a guy, So I ended up with who is it? I ended up with where's my team here? I ended up with Yonny Chirinos, who's coming back from injury, but could factor in Michael King, who the Stuff Plus really likes and kind of pairs up with Luis Heel pretty interestingly. Glenn Otto, who by all accounts by the model looks like an average pitcher in a good park. And then Tommy Romero that was just a kind of my prospect pick. But and then I use Andy Ibanez to portion off with Nick Solak. Hope that one of the two of them gets a regular gig for the Rangers. And then Stephen Kwong with Josh Naylor. So basically handcuffed a couple of situations there. And I think handcuffs and starting pitcher are best use of your reserves in mono leagues.
Yeah, I wanted to play against some injury concerns that I had. I think the way I built my pitching staff on a relative budget leaves me vulnerable to IL time. So I made sure I got a few starters. Mitch White was my first reserve pick. I think there's just plenty of innings for him this year. I think Bailey Falter could have a multi-inning role, maybe back-end starter opportunity in Philly. And then Miguel Yajure, who we've talked a lot about before, I think he's got a clear path in Pittsburgh. If he's healthy, he should be one of their top 5 starters sooner rather than later. And then there's Caleb Killian, who was pitching really well in the minors for the Cubs last year, had a good fall league as well. We had some questions about him. I think come in maybe a few weeks ago.
There'll probably be opportunity in that rotation.
What's blocking him? And I think they're one of those teams that once we get out of the lockout, maybe there's another free agent signing coming because you don't add Marcus Stroman by himself on a 3-year deal.
But I think if they add anything at this point, it's a bat maybe.
Maybe it's Trevor Story.
We put Trevor Story on every team now.
Trevor Story has been signed to every team, and Tommy Pham has been the A's like 11 times. It's an incredible record that will never, ever be shattered. But hopefully, even if you don't play in formats like this, hopefully the conversation was enjoyable. And if it wasn't, thanks for listening to the end of the show anyway. If you'd like to come back next time, it'll be a focus on late outfielders. We're going to get the UT players in there too. So we'll have some Shohei Ohtani talk in there. We'll have some Franmil Reyes talk, some Nelson Cruz. Got to make sure we get those UT players a little bit of love, even though there aren't that many of them in the pool going into this season. If you got other questions, you can email us ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. On Twitter, he's at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. At theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels gets you a subscription for $1 a month for the first 6 months. It's a really good deal. So be sure to get that. And as always, if you want to comment on this video on YouTube, we really appreciate that too. We'll be sure to check those for any questions and ideas that are thrown out there as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.